Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. It was Lenin's favorite childhood story. It's the Iliad of the blacks. It's America's national epic. She's claimed that God wrote it. She's the little lady who made this big war. She's Harriet Beecher Stowe. It's Uncle Tom's Cabin. Both are the subject of David Reynolds' new book about the two of them, Uncle Tom and Harriet Beecher Stowe. It's titled Mightier Than the Sword, Uncle Tom's Cabin and the Battle for America. David is Distinguished Professor of English and American Studies at the CUNY Graduate Center. His works include the award-winning Waking Giant, America in the Age of Jackson, Walt Whitman's America, and John Brown, Abolitionist, as well as scores of articles, op-eds, reviews, and essays. Welcome back, David.
It's great to be here again, Doug. Thank you.
Congratulations. I've got another insightful and entertaining semester in American history, mainly 19th century history. Enough for a couple of shows.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we could talk forever about Uncle Tom's Cabin.
And we're going to spend a half hour doing it. Now, in my notes, I have that the reviews are not in, but in fact, in the mailbox this morning was a review in the New Yorker where the book is called "The Most Fascinating Part of His Lively and Perceptive Cultural History is the Account of How She Did It," how Beecher Stowe wrote the book.
That caused the Civil War.
And caused the Civil War. Talk about how you came to write this book.
Well, I was approached several years ago by a publisher who said, "How would you like to write a biography of a book?" I said, "What book? Uncle Tom's Cabin?" I said, "Yeah, that would be fabulous." And I started writing it, and I realized how many roots it had, how much it had a life like an individual, but it lived longer than most individuals. And it just coincided with the 200th anniversary of her birth that it came out. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, talking about anniversaries, June 14th is the 200th anniversary of her birth. The first installment of Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was serialized in 40 sections, was June 5th, 1851, 160 years ago, and 150 years ago, the Civil War starts. So how did you match all these stars in terms of anniversaries?
Yeah, well, Doug, it was just luck, sheer luck. I started this about 5 years ago, and it just, as the anniversary approached, I said, we have to make it for the 200th anniversary of her birth.
You do reviews. You do reviews for the Times. I just recently read one on Tocqueville, one on John Brown. If you're a reviewer, can you step back and review your own book?
Well, what I would do it is I would do it in what Annette Gordon Reed does in the New Yorker, and take off and talk about the influence of culture. This is an example of culture and how culture influences politics.
Yeah, talk about that. What fascinated me was all the strains of popular culture that feed into this, and then all the popular culture that comes out. Talk about what went in and what came out.
Well, as I did my research for the book, I found that religious elements of culture went in there, anti-slavery elements went in there, sentimental domestic, sensational adventure went in there, erotic went in there. Everything kind of fed right into it incredibly. It was like a bunch of streams going into a river, and then that river itself spread through the world.
Talk about the title of the book, both the main title and after the colon, Mightier Than the Sword. What are you saying here?
I'm saying that a work like Uncle Tom's Cabin, in the end, was even mightier than violence, because over time it was Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and the nonviolent people who really made race a central issue, and in a way they were imitating Uncle Tom. And so I'm saying that it's the cultural influences that cause things, and quite often they can have to do with rhetoric and with writing.
But in a sense, it doesn't happen, the freedom of the slaves, the achievement of a goal, without the sword. And in fact, she helps produce the swords on both sides, both feeding into anti-abolitionism, but causing this, as you chronicle extensively, this tremendous reaction. Talk about that.
Yeah, well, at first, her book came out in 1852. The Civil War begins in 1861, 9 years later. But in between that, the book galvanized feelings on both sides of the slavery divide, so that, violence ultimately was the only answer, because slavery became so deeply entrenched. And so she ends up supporting John Brown, the violent John Brown. And
interesting, given her Christian background, because that infuses the book.
I know, yeah. So she ends up realizing that only violence will uproot slavery, and she was right, ultimately.
And the battle for America is what? What were they battling over, and where does the battle continue well beyond the Civil War?
Yeah, the battle is simply: are blacks human beings to be respected and to be tolerated and to be embraced by society, or are they to be enslaved, or are they to be excluded from society? That's the battle, and she wins the battle in the end, to some degree at least. I mean, we still have a ways to go, but that's essentially the battle.
As I read this book, the one nagging question was, given all these tentacles and branches that you trace coming out of Uncle Tom's Cabin, is there too much weight on the book? Meaning, is there too much that it's done, in a sense?
Well, in a way, it becomes scattered. The book kind of goes everywhere, and it becomes distorted, and it becomes used in cartoons and advertisements and everything. And in a way, it becomes, people rely on it too much and refer to it too much. So yeah, it becomes dissipated to some degree. That's
okay, talk about what went in. Talk about, you articulated all of these influences. What motivates her to write this book? Now, she claims, whether metaphorically or literally, that God wrote it.
Yeah, yeah. She was raised in a religious family, and a remarkable family of preachers. Her father was Lyman Beecher, the head preacher of New England, and her brother was Henry Ward Beecher, who became the leading preacher of 19th century America. She had many sisters and brothers who were equally influential as Henry Ward Beecher, and she was even more influential. So it's really, really a religious vision, and she goes to church and she has a vision of a black man being whipped, and she goes home, she writes that down, that becomes the culminating scene. But everything that she had written before that, she had written short stories before that, all these popular culture elements fuse together and come together and produce this incredible novel.
And this novel, I mean, clearly you read it and it is sentimental, it's melodramatic, but at the same time, it really has tremendous strong points, the pathos, the humor, the appeal to value is there. There's a lot of stuff. I mean, in fact, you ruined.
Yeah.
I spent a considerable amount of time going back to the original book and reading it, because I only had read it in high school. And you look at it as a modern reader and say, oh man, But at the same time, you messed up with the book. You still do, irrespective of the time.
I know. Well, it's funny that when I reread this book for my class last time, here's a brand new edition that I just came out.
Yeah, no, and then you're going to come out with one, and it's beautifully illustrated.
Yeah, has 145 illustrations. But for the first time, I actually cried, because I knew everything that had gone into that book by writing this book. And for the first time, I really cried when I read the book. And I think that people today will have a good cry and a good laugh when they read Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Is there any possibility that there would be a film made of it? I mean, there was the famous 1927 silent film, which at that time was one of the most expensive films ever made.
Yeah, very, very expensive.
The political environment has changed, and you sort of trace, or you do trace, the sort of the etymology of the term Uncle Tom from the original character through its various metamorphoses. Talk about that element of it, how that meaning has changed, and how, as you read the book, when you go back to the book, Uncle Tom is not an Uncle Tom.
No. He's a 40-year-old man or so, muscular. He saves a white girl from drowning. He's a family man. He's strong. He's not weak whatsoever. He's gentle and compassionate, but he's not weak at all. And yet, over time, in stage plays, he was portrayed as a feeble old fool, and that distorted the Uncle Tom figure and produced what the Uncle Tom of today.
Yeah, and it wasn't only whites who looked at the Uncle Tom as the sort of the step-it-fetch-it character,
Right.
but blacks used it as a pejorative internally in their discussions about the actions of other blacks.
Yes,
I mean,
they
that's
did.
That's the nigger word. I mean,
Yeah,
calling
exactly,
somebody an
exactly,
Uncle Tom.
yeah. Well, James Baldwin called it a bad novel because a lot of the black militants of the 20th century wanted a more militant view of blacks, and so it became a very pejorative term, particularly during the Civil Rights Movement. But still, nonviolence won.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, you look at the parallels between Martin Luther King and his approach of direct action but civil disobedience, and you see an Uncle Tom-like character in the original, if you will.
That's right. Martin Luther King was often compared in his own time with Uncle Tom, but he didn't mind the comparison because he admired the real Uncle Tom.
So the society would have benefited by having you written this book a couple of decades ago.
I guess so, yeah.
No. What was the single element of this book that made it the greatest selling novel of the 19th century? And one that you trace Lenin's favorite childhood story, the serfs in Russia. Talk about these resonances and ramifications of this book.
Well, it was the first book published in China and translated into Chinese. It influenced the revolutions in Cuba and in Brazil. It influenced popular culture in so many ways in America. It was made into 9 silent films.
Talk about more about popular culture in America, and then we'll move on.
Okay, yeah.
The various things. I mean, you point out that there are Mickey Mouse cartoons with Uncle Tom.
Yes.
There are Bugs Bunny cartoons with Uncle Tom.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
You had a really good time writing this book.
Oh, it was fun.
I mean, you did.
It was fun.
How many aha moments did you have? I mean, you read the book and you say, at this point, he was reading this and he went, aha.
Yeah.
Talk about a couple of those aha moments.
Well, I loved it. You can actually watch the Mickey's Melodrama, which is the Mickey Mouse Uncle Tom on YouTube. You can watch a lot of these things on YouTube.
Oh,
amazing.
Okay. No, I haven't seen it. I just
and that
read
was
it.
an incredible aha moment. I mean, so many. Every moment that I was writing this, I was saying aha. It was just incredible.
Yeah, and one of the things that struck me is the tie-ins in merchandising. You think of that as sort of a modern marketing business school phenomenon, but coming almost immediately upon publication of the book, you've got all kinds of things from spoons to mugs to T-shirt. I mean, you have
jigsaw
the whole
puzzles.
Jigsaw. Go ahead, go.
Oh, just everything. As you said, the mantelpiece screens, restaurant dishes in Paris, woolen stockings in London. Everything. It was incredible.
What caused this universal resonance here? What was it about the book?
Emotion.
And you've read it, reread it.
Emotion, making people cry and laugh. Emotion. It's just, if you read this book, it's amazing.
Yeah, and in a sense, it's really universal.
Yeah,
but also it's got suspense as well. I mean, the chase of Eliza and George.
Yeah,
and you've got the 2 plot lines. You've got sort of them moving north and escaping, and Tom moving south into slavery.
One plot, the northern plot, in which Eliza and George Harris escape north, is one of triumph and suspense.
Yeah.
The other plot is one of sorrow and tragedy.
But they work together. I mean, even novelistically, she puts it together in such a way that the 2 stories really do work, and in some ways they do intertwine. So it's not. In some ways, I had remembered the reviews when I read it, in my school days, that this was, old and sentimental and
I know,
all of that stuff. And then you read it, and it's quite different.
Yeah, no, it's very realistic in many ways too. She's a realistic writer, and she's not really that sentimental, despite the emotion. It's not really that sentimental.
Now, critics both at the time and then subsequently have really called into question some of her quote-unquote scholarship. And one of the things, the beauties of the internet, is that a couple of years after writing Uncle Tom's Cabin, she writes The Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin, which is sort of an intellectual and bibliographic defense of what she wrote. Talk about The Key, because in some ways, The Key is more virulently anti-slavery and intriguing without the plot line than the novel was.
I know. Well, she goes through The Key, and she says that most of these characters were based on real-life figures, and she shows how deeply rooted in American reality the horrors of slavery were at that time. And The Key is an amazing anti-slavery document, a collection of facts about slavery that sold very well in its day, and it was just utterly shocking to people who read The Key.
What was the most disturbing thing that you ran across in your research of the book?
Well,
I mean, we talked about sort of the glories of the aha moment, sort of the intellectual discovery of, and you could see it as you're reading plays and the dramaturgy. What just got you down?
I was horrified by the slave narratives that she wrote, the histories of the slaves. I was just horrified by them, and they really depressed me even to this very day.
And
They're
clearly,
very, very sad. Very sad.
And again, they're available on the internet. And some of the ones that she goes back to are really, very, very powerful.
I know. I almost don't like to talk about them. They're just horrible.
Now, so she writes the book, and she gets all this acclaim, both domestically and internationally. I mean, it sold hundreds of thousands of copies, not immediately, not only in the United States, but in Britain. And in fact, the world sales, rivaled the American sales. And now, I read some of the estimates, they're talking about 7.5 million volumes. And then in the 19th century, lots of people didn't read, so they had it read to them.
Yeah, exactly.
So the audience must have been huge.
It was huge. They say there were 10 readers for every purchases of the book, because they used to read this aloud to their families.
So you talk about, 1 million copies multiplied by 10, that's 10 million.
Yeah.
And a country whose population is relatively small compared to today.
Yeah,
so
they didn't have
everybody read it?
They couldn't watch TV back then, so they read Uncle Tom's Cabin. And it's amazing. Yeah.
And you then trace the sort of, going back to your title, Uncle Tom's Cabin and the Battle for America. Talk about the different or disparate impacts it has both in the North, generally speaking, and the South, generally speaking. What happened?
Well, in the North, before the novel appeared in 1852, the anti-slavery movement was very weak and divided. But this really galvanized anti-slavery feeling in the North. And it helped give rise to Lincoln and the Republican Party. In the South, it made the South very defensive, and it created a whole pro-slavery backlash in the South.
Yeah, you had all these anti-Uncle Tom novels. Now, in some ways, going back again to your title, she creates a situation that really polarizes, your argument, polarizes public opinion over the issue, and then almost inevitably leads to, with other factors, obviously.
Yeah, I know.
It's not monocausal, leads to the Civil War.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so mightier than the sword, yes, but the sword was necessary.
Now,
the sword was necessary.
I mean, you were a professor of English and, and history. Are there any other novels that come to mind that have had the immediate real world impacts, as well as these rather substantial derivative impacts, both in the short term, mid-term, and long term? Is there anything that approaches that?
There's nothing. The only other document is the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution, but they're not novels.
Right. I mean, and then the Bible, in fact.
The Bible.
I mean, it was the second largest selling book.
To the Bible,
To the Bible.
Yeah.
And her claim that it was written by God, I guess, hopefully was metaphoric, because then it would have to go into the biblical canon.
Yeah.
What else? What else are you up to? What other characters are out there that sort of are rattling around in your brain that come out of this? Because there's some, after you read enough David Reynolds, there's little snippets of, you know, little short pieces of the earliest stuff. So you've got John Brown in there.
Yeah.
You've got a little bit of Whitman in there.
Yeah.
Where do you go from here?
Well, good question. I mean, I'm thinking of writing our narrative history of the American Enlightenment, going back in time a little bit and comparing that to what people like Sarah Palin and other people are saying today.
So you're going to bring in, you're going to contemporize it?
Yeah, I was thinking of doing that, yeah.
Ooh, talk a little more. I want to get into this head a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, basically, the right wing has really distorted history in a lot of ways. It's the kind of thing I'd rather not talk about until I've actually formulated.
Okay.
But there's so many characters here that are just interesting that I'd love to get into. D.W. Griffith is one of them. I mean, you know, just.
Okay. Let's talk about D.W. Griffith and the movies, because coming out of the South were all these anti-Tom novels,
right.
And then one of the authors who gained fame was this guy Dixon, who wrote The Klansman, which is the basis of. Talk about sort of that novel and its production as the movie, and the movie's impact. I mean, because that movie had a tremendous impact in forming American attitudes. I mean, I remember reading a story of Woodrow Wilson watching it, applauding it, and saying it was like lightning in a bottle or something.
History made by lightning,
Talk about sort of this perverse consequence of the writing.
Yeah, I know. Well, what happened is that during the Jim Crow era, Uncle Tom's Cabin was considered a very threatening novel because supposedly it unleashed blacks on American society. So The Klansman by Dixon was written against Uncle Tom's Cabin, and Birth of a Nation was based on The Klansman. And Birth of a Nation influenced cultural attitudes after that.
I mean, it's astounding. If folks haven't seen Birth of a Nation, it is just astounding. It's astounding in several ways. I mean, it's astounding as a piece of cinematic art, but it's also astounding in terms of the values and distortions of history that it produces, and that become the history for a lot of people.
They have a scene of the KKK. The KKK become the heroes of
and these black, I mean, talking about stereotypes, these black men, you know, ravaging white women, it seems like there's this psychological problem.
And that gives rise to a real-life rise of the KKK in the 1920s and 30s and everything like that.
So again,
it influences culture.
Yeah, see, what's fascinating about the book, and you keep coming back to that, is the mutual interaction of these works and culture, that they are both the product of it, but also, even more importantly, that they create whole realms of quote-unquote reality that we don't see.
Exactly. I mean, a good example recently of how culture influences history is outsiders. We often think politics lead history, but culture leads history. Al-Qaeda, which is a very minor cultural group, has dangled Western politics for a decade now. And it's just amazing how culture influences politics.
But in this case, it's popular culture that influences politics in a way that you often don't think of it.
No.
Even those of us who are paid to think of it like that.
I know.
What about today, an Uncle Tom's Cabin?
Well, I think it's a wonderful time for us to reread Uncle Tom's Cabin. And
film?
Yes, maybe a film. A good film.
I mean, clearly the 1927 film was, in many ways, a much more congruent piece of work with the book than one might have expected, but still it had its own biases and stereotypes.
It did.
If you were asked to, somebody's going to do a movie on Uncle Tom's Cabin. Martin Scorsese calls up David Reynolds, said, I was browsing in Barnes & Noble, I saw this book, I read it, I picked up Uncle Tom's Cabin, I want to do the movie. What do you advise them?
I advise them to stay very true to the book. The book is just amazing with its characterization. It's amazing, and too many of the films make it into a melodrama. It's not really a melodrama. It's quite realistic, and I would advise him to do what he's done in some of his other films, of really, and keep to the history. Keep to the history,
Is this a
don't
good
make it
suggestion?
into-
Do I
yeah.
get any money for suggesting? Did this cross your mind before? Because if you start proposing, would you ever consider writing, for example, a screenplay?
I would love to, sure. I would love
Have you ever, do you have your own novel or screenplay stuffed in some drawers at home?
I have my own memoir that a couple of publishers have rejected, but and I've been approached.
We'll talk about that next time.
Yeah, I've been approached about doing screenplays and so forth. Even Walt Whitman's America is under consideration by a major company. And so
Oh,
forth,
interesting.
But again, I don't want to talk about it, but so yeah,
Oh,
yeah. So,
this could be good.
yeah.
Current impacts.
Yeah.
What reverberations do we sense around Uncle Tom's Cabin today? 2011.
Well, I think if people can reach the point that little Eva, a white character in this book, reaches with Uncle Tom, Harriet Beecher Stowe says, your little child is your true Democrat, and she reaches out to Uncle Tom. If we can reach that sensibility of reaching across the racial divide, then I think we'll come a long, long way.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
then I can't wait till the next book.
Yeah.
It's my seminar. You better do it 5 years. It takes you to write these things.
Yeah, I know. Well, it takes a lot of work, but it's fun.
And it's fun
always
reading
fun.
it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My special thanks to David Reynolds for being a guest on my show. You can celebrate Harriet Beecher Stowe's 200th birthday at a book signing with David Reynolds on Wednesday, June 15th at 7 p.m. at the Barnes & Noble at Broadway and 82nd Street. I'm sure you're going to be all over the place.
Yes, I will. I'm doing an op-ed for the New York Times on June 14th.
I'm going to keep in touch with you via email
Thank
and
you.
Comment on the reviews.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care. Thanks very much.
It's great being here.
Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.